Hi, Kranti has joined in. Alright, guys, so let's go and just do a little. Kranti, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. Is Nagaraj joining in a bit?
Yeah, he should
Any
be
idea?
joining.
Alright, cool. Alright, sorry about this time shift and schedule shift, guys. This power thing is getting a little irritating, but I'm sorry. We should fix it in tomorrow. Alright, and just let me know if this time is okay with all of you, then I'll do it at this time, or I can push it a little earlier as well from tomorrow. Alright. So we've been looking through the data provisioning part of it. We've seen about how we go and handle data provisioning in three different methods. One was the SLT for customers, the SAP's Landscape Transformation Server. We were using that with customers who have an older version of ECC, alright, ECC 4.6C onwards. You can go ahead and integrate with the SLT server through the RFC connection, and you build the framework for SLT. All right. So in situations where you have a lower version of the SAP ECC system, you would be using the solution manager, the instance of the solution manager for building the SLT server. Use that for connecting data from the source system into the SAP HANA database. On the second method, we went ahead and connected data from, or we went ahead and use the second method for customers who are on the latest version of SAP ECC. So for these customers, you don't really have to have a separate server for SLT. You can have this SLT server installed on a different instance on the source system. The only difference is that you wouldn't have another extra server in here. You will still have to have an RFC connection between both these systems and a database connection connecting the SLT server with the HANA database, right? So this is the second choice for customers who are on the latest version of the ECC system. And the third method that we were looking into yesterday was trying to connect data from SAP or non-SAP systems through data services into the SAP HANA system. All right. So we talked about the two-directional approach by using data services. This is a near real-time replication method, but gives you the approach for great transformation capability and data quality aspect as well. Right, so this is one of the approaches that is used by a lot of clients because it has a capability for transformation that can be handled outside the SAP HANA box. And it also has a capability to connect to both SAP and non-SAP, and this is the only ETL that is actually able to connect to the HANA database. Right, so we'll try to go ahead and look at how the SAP HANA can be connected through the data services ETL tool. Right, this is also called as the ETL based replication. I've given you a little overview about how this happens. You basically will have the SAP HANA first using the data services data store concept and connecting to the SAP system. And through the SAP's data store created in data services, it will connect to the tables and brings the structure into the SAP HANA box. Once you bring that structure into the SAP HANA box, you will then pull that table back into data services and then try to load that using the batch jobs that you create in data services. Alright, so let me first log into the SAP HANA Studio. Alright, so once you log into the SAP HANA Studio, the data services integration is done at the configure import server. So once you click on this, you would basically will be looking into the repository name that you should be giving in here. The repository that we're using is HANA. I do not need the data source name, so I'll delete that. And the default port that you should be using is 8080. Alright, so you could go ahead and click on that. On the other front, you will also be logging into the data services designer, which is the interface that you're connecting through data services. The designer holds the repository objects. Again, the repository basically consists of an encapsulation over the database, which consists of a lot of system tables that will hold definitions of objects that you create in the data services designer. So once you log into the data services, first you have to authenticate through the central management console, and then you would be able to look at your repository. You can log into the repository that you have. So in the repository, you have a concept here.
So the repository which you gave in the HANA box is the same as this repository name, isn't it? So
that is correct.
Okay.
Yes. So what we're trying to do here is first in the import server, you have to tell into which repository you would want, because now when you give the repository name here, now it connects to this repository. Okay, and in this repository is where we define the data stores for the SAP connection. Alright, so here if you go into this repository in the designer, so here is where you have these different data stores that we've created. Okay, now if I go into the HANA box and then try to go and do the import through the import mechanism, so you select your system here. So when you do the import, what the system does is it actually connects to the data stores, the SAP data stores in that repository. It will connect to that. All right. So here, let's say we have a repository called, or a data store called HANA Bio. Okay. So that same data store is an SAP data store that you have here. So if you go into the edit mode, you will find that all the SAP applications that you have. So I've defined the username and all that here. So what happens is it uses this data store connection in the data services to actually connect to the SAP systems. And what it can go ahead and bring is the tables and the extractors. Okay. Now with 4.0 you have an addition of the metadata that you can import from ECC. They made it a little easier by giving extractor also as a concept. Now extractor, you understand what these extractors are, right? So extractors are basic views that you can create on the different tables on the ECC side. And the extractors give you the capability to extract it with the model. So if you have, let's say, a sales header, you can bring in VBAK and VBUK joined at ECC and bring in the view itself here. So it gives you that ability. But in case you are trying to model it here, you bring in both the tables into the SAP HANA box and then define the joins in there. So that's the advantage that you have with extractors. I'll talk to you about that in a bit. So once you go into the import aspect, so here there are different imports that you could do. Import of models, you can do import of mass data, import of right now what we're doing is selective import of metadata using the data services method. So I am going to use the HANA BO connection that I've defined in data services for SAP connections. So here I have to define a few things. One is I'll have to give my credentials, the application server to which I'm connected to, my username and password. If you go into the advanced tab, I'll have to give my client number, my system number that I'm connecting to. Your do you want to execute in background? That is optional. And again, if you go and use the ABAP data flows later on, you can go ahead and use the information of the working directory and the application path to the shared directory. So both of that you will go ahead and include as well. All right. So once you do that, so you can go ahead and click on apply. So your basic connection to the SAP system is done. Now once you do that, you would use this credentials to actually log in from the HANA database into the data service, into the ECC system. All right. So it basically brings in just the metadata using this connection. You don't really have to import that table here before the extraction happens. So since we are already started that, so I've imported that, but basically it doesn't need that you need to import. So let's say you're trying to bring in a COPA table like C planned or C actuals data. So you don't really have to go ahead and give that table name. So in this list, you don't really have the CE table, all right, which is the COPA operating concern table. So you can go ahead and click on the modular, and let's say on the tables front, if you go click next, so the system will go ahead and try and connect to the data services through this data store configuration here. Now, if you actually click on the manage connections, which I'll show you after, you will actually see the entire data services data store configuration brought into the SAP HANA system. All right. Along with it, it will also bring in the CMC authentication, and also we've seen that encryption passcode, right? So even that information is brought in. So once it authenticates all of this, that is when it will actually connect through this data store into the SAP system. Alright, during the selective import, you basically only bring the metadata of the object, but you will not bring in the data perspective or the data of the table or the extractor into SAP. Okay, from SAP into the HANA system. Alright, so you could go ahead and give this table name that you want. Let's say you're bringing in CE1 idea. So if there is a table called CE1 idea inside the SAP system, so it will go ahead and bring that in. Usually the COPA tables are defined this way, which have the CE1 as the actuals table followed by the operating concern name, which has a 4-digit alphanumeric value. In our case, let's say this is idea. So you'd have CE1 idea table. So you can go and search for that table if you want to. Yesterday we have imported VBUP, so we'll go ahead and see how we can bring both of these data into the system. We moved them into a schema called project_1, I think, right? So at this moment, what it is doing is it is actually connecting through the data store into the SAP system, and it is searching for any object which has this name through which it can pull in. It need not be
Are you there?
I'm there. Hello. Yes. So you got this table CE1 idea, the operating concern table for actual data. So what you do is now you right click on this, or you can just go and click and add this into this target system, which is your HANA database. But once you go bring this table into the HANA database, you will also have to go ahead and mention into which schema you want to write this metadata. Alright, so you go in here and you select this, let's say project 1. Okay, so you select this project 1. So you have multiple schemas on the database. So you'd go ahead and click on project 1 to which you're loading. Then you can click next. So what happens is it'll bring the structure of this entire table, okay, without the data, okay, just the structure part, and you would validate that before you actually load that structure into the SAP HANA database. The other side for this is if you know the structure really well and if you are clear with the SQL coding to go ahead and create a table, you can go to the SQL editor and create the table there as well. You can click on finish. So you've added this into the schema project 1, right? So if you go into the project 1 here in the catalog folder, so you would find this schema called project 1. We have actually created. If you go into the tables here, you will find the CE1 table actually that's gone in. And if you right click and check on that, you will find that the data preview brings in only an empty table, just the structure of it is created. So now that if you want to go and load data for this particular table, now this is the second way of actually bringing this metadata from the HANA system back into data services system. So what you do is you go ahead and you log into data services environment now. Once you log into the data services environment, you will create a project. Okay, I'm not using the ABAP data flow in here, but we're connecting directly, but I'll show you the uh, upside and downside of using the ABAP data flows. So firstly, we have to import that table from ECC because we need to load that data. So the CE1 idea table needs to be brought in. Click on the import, you will have that table brought in here. Now I'll use that as my source. Why is that coming through? All right. So the next thing will be to actually load the HANA database with the table here, and I'll use the HANA connection that I've created as a data store. So yesterday I've shown you how you can actually create the connection with the HANA system as well, right? So if you want, I can just quickly go through that. So you create a data store as with the data type as database, and you will use the HANA data type or the data type that you could use here is HANA, and you have a database version of HANA 1.x. Your data source name is something that you could go ahead and define with the ODBC administrator. So you can click on this. You will have the information here. You can add a data source. Once you go ahead and click on the add button, you would have an extra option here which is called the HDBODC. Okay, HDB ODBC. Alright, so you can go ahead and click on the finish button in here. So it will ask you for the data source name. You go ahead and give an HANA connection. You can go ahead and define that. Once you define that, you have a server port. Now here the server port, basically you will have to give in the server name, which is the host name, and followed by the port number. Alright, this port number is from the index server SQL port that you will have to give. The port number has a standard, so you basically, if you look into the HANA server, your host name is on the quick launch. You can see that HANA SP5, that is your host name, and this is the instance number. Alright, so you could go into the business objects.
Hi, Emmanuel, I have one question.
Tell me, sir.
Can you please go to the HANA modeler?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go to the monitor button. Monitor.
This one?
The next one. Yeah, that button. You can click on one schema and
yeah.
Go to the landscape. Landscape. That is the index server port number 30503.
See,
right?
there are two ports that you have. One is a fixed port that you would have, and there is also an SQL port that you will have.
Okay.
All right. For the preprocessor server and the index server, you will have two ports. One is the fixed port, which is this index port, index server port, which is 30503. That is a fixed port. You will also have a SQL port, which is 3 followed by the index number or the instance number followed by 15. That is for index server. For the preprocessor server, you will have 3 followed by the instance number followed by 17.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Alright, so once you go ahead and give this number, the port, this is HANA SP5 column, the port number is 305 and 15, right? So once you go ahead and define that, click on connect. So it will ask you for the username of the HANA database, which is by default system, and you have the password. Once I go ahead and give that information, so I have a successful connection. So I can go ahead and use that thing that I've created here, the connection with the ODBC. I can use that and give the data source name in here. All right. For the data store, the data source name is a mandatory field, but on the import server, you don't really have to define that. All right. It is not mandatory, though you have a place for defining it. It is not mandatory. Your port number is mandatory in there. Okay, not the HANA port, but your default port, which is 8080. So there are no specific changes that you'd make on the advanced settings, and you can go ahead and click on apply, and you should be able to connect to the HANA database. Just like any other database that you create on the data services system, you have the 3 components of functions, tables, and template tables. You can go ahead and bring in or you can go ahead and look through the tables that you have. We've just imported this table structure called CE1 idea into the project 1. So let's go and search for that schema. So you can go and click on search. You have 2 options, internal and external data. Click on the external data. You will be connecting to CE1 idea. And this search will basically look through all the schemas that are there on the HANA system and bring in the CE1 idea from all the schemas that I have. Right? From there, we will choose only the schema that we need, which is project 1, to load the data at the target level.
And one more question, Emmanuel. Before setting up the data services connection in the CMC, you mentioned some enter passphrase, right? Enter passphrase, something in
Yeah,
CMC.
yeah.
So I checked some of the systems. So passphrase exists for by default. We don't need to do anything manually, right?
See, passphrase, okay, so let's say you have a default passphrase. So what is the
Okay.
passphrase there?
I
Because
don't know.
sometimes what happens is when you
Yeah.
actually go and try to import the data from data services, it
Mm-hmm.
will fail at the manage connections when you're clicking on the import. When you click
That's
on
right.
your connection, you will have the entire list of all the properties. And in that properties, you also have an entry for passphrase, which is mandatory.
Yeah.
Right? So you can also go and manually enter that in there. So if you do not
Okay.
know the passphrase, then
Mm-hmm.
you've not defined a passphrase, so it will ask you to define a passphrase.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Right. So you have project 1 here, the schema that into which we have
Can you do
loaded
that
this.
pre-request once again if you have time?
Which one? You
The
want to go into
pre-request,
that?
now we have to, whatever, we have to do that. Okay.
So you go into the start menu and go into the management console. All right. Log on. In the applications, you will also have data services application. Right click on it and go to your settings tab. So in your settings, you have the encryption passphrase, right? So you will have to go ahead and define that in here. The reason why you define that is this is also a mandatory entry point before you log into the data store inside data services. It has to authenticate at this level as well. Okay, and in case you have not defined and the system is not able to connect, you will have to come here and define it. Okay, sometimes your manage connections option doesn't work directly and you cannot bring in the metadata from your data stores into the HANA database. So in those scenarios, if you click on the import, it will fail with a reason saying your passphrase setting is not done. Okay, at those scenarios, you will have to go and add a passphrase in there. So I have, did I import that particular table?
Yes, you did.
Sir, I did. I don't see that here.
First one.
This is HANA connection starting with C.
Okay.
I don't know. Could be. This is Copa. So you would have the schema name also along with it. So if I say import, so close. Alright, so this is the one on the top. So if I bring this in as a target table here, okay, what's happened to all of these schema names?
That is a SAP data store.
Oh shit. Sorry, just a moment. Right. So here if you see the CE1 idea, project 1, so you bring that as your target table. Alright, so once you go and bring it as a target table, Go into the query tab and you would have table structure in here and the query structure. So when I go and execute this job, if I do not have any invalid characters, then I should be actually able to load the data directly into the table that you have. So you have a two-directional method right now, if you see. One is you are first bringing in the metadata of that table into the HANA database, then you're bringing that table back from HANA database into the data services system. You're importing that back into data services system, and then you're using that as a target table. All right. So it is a two-way method that you will handle. Now, in case you want to handle, so it does not by default come with the delta handling capability, right? So you will have to go ahead and define the structure for handling deltas through either your target CDC or source CDC. Usually you define a source CDC here than in target CDC. All right, so once you go ahead and do that, once you load the data from here, this data will be available for you directly into the SAP HANA database. All right, so now the advantage about using this particular methodology to load data into the HANA system is you have a lot of capability for transformations. All right, you could go ahead and cleanse your data. You can do transformations before you actually load the data. You can define rules. You can validate data. All of these different things you can handle here in the data services system. And finally, you can load that data into the SAP system after you do your basic checks. The refined data can be moved into that. All right, but if you're not doing all right, but the only downside for data services is that it is not a real-time process. It's a near real-time based on whenever you want the data. You can go ahead and schedule the job and run that. But apart from that, you don't have the real-time replication option for the data into SAP HANA. Right, so it's taking a little while.
Emmanuel, can we create a real-time job here?
It lets you create it, but it doesn't really work that way. So it's
Okay.
always a scheduling option, which is a better thing than, so you basically schedule it to run 4 or 5 times in a day.
Yeah.
So you would have data populated at these hours regularly.
Okay.
All right. It's taking a little while to load that data in. So this data will be actually be loaded into the, how much data do we have? Yeah, into the persistence layer of the SAP HANA database, and it will be created as row stores. All right. And these tables, this is the only time that you are persistently saving and loading data into the HANA system. You will not go ahead and load this data at any other modeling level. You don't persistently store data at any other model. Right? This is the only time that you will be loading data into the SAP HANA system. From here on, these tables that are created will be used and defined after you define the joins in the models. These will be consumed at runtime, but they will not have another layer where you will load data into. Okay, so now if you go into the HANA box and then you want to go and look at the project 1 schema. And you have this particular table that is loaded. So you have CE1 idea. You can right click on it and say open data preview. So you would supposedly have the data loaded from data services into the HANA box. All right. So you have
No, it will keep us a column store.
which one
The data is coming as a column store here.
is it?
Yeah, the picture shows column store, that icon.
Okay, at the persistence layer. So you can actually change in between. You want to create it as a row store or a column store. You can
That's
create
the
or change.
column store, that one. Yeah.
Okay.
That is row store. Down one is column store.
Right. So it depends on whether you're replicating that here as a column store, but usually it is stored as a row store only. All right. At the persistence layer. All right. Once you create your models, those models are created as column stores at the _sys_bic schema. All right. That is where your actual reporting layer connects into. Your read options of data will happen from the _sys_bic schema that you have. This is a system schema that is generated, into which you have the actual column views. Okay, so this is where data will be stored as column views, and from here is where your reporting tools will pick up your data. Okay. Alright, so here is a preview option as well in the properties of the table or the metadata that you have imported. Now, this is one option of loading the data where you're trying to bring in SAP data into the HANA database. You also have the option to load data from non-SAP systems as well. So let's say you have data on your desktop on a, let's say you have some data from here. Let's say you have this data on a text file. You can go ahead and push this data also into the SAP HANA system using the data services method for loading the data. All right. All that you need to do is you'll have to create a file format over this particular table, and then you can use that as a source. So let's say in our case, quickly, let's go and create a file format. So on your local root directory, go ahead and define it as on the desktop. And your file is a text file that you're using. So let's say test2 as the file. And you define the delimiter for actually loading. I'm using tab here. And I don't really want to write my headers. So once I go ahead and define, let's say I have these 3 rows that I want to write into HANA system. Alright, so I can go ahead and define my structure here, the way it should be loaded in. So this is the structure that I want. I click on the save and close. Alright, so you can go ahead and create a new job. So I'm using this as my source here, my file system, and then I'll click the query. Now HANA is also a database, so it gives us the option to create template tables as well. So I can go and select my database connection, HANA_connection. I can give a name here, load underscore from file. Okay, so let's say that is my table name that I want to define. And go into the query and map these fields. So once I go and map these fields, just validate this job. Now the advantage with the HANA system is you can go and use a template, and later on you can go ahead and create it as a permanent table as well, just by the import option. What I do is I go right click on my job, I say execute. Now when I do this execute, what happens is I will go ahead and load the job into the HANA system, but the table actually writes into the system schema. Alright, so you can go ahead and control that as well to load it into the individual schema that you want to. So here if you go in, you have a system schema that is created, since that's the database user. So you can go in here and look at the tables. Alright, so you see this here, load from file. So if you open the preview, basically we'll have the structure and the data actually populated into the HANA database, into this particular schema. You can also mention specifically into which schema you want to load data as well. Alright.
But we didn't mention the whether it is a column or row store.
So here by default it creates it. So whenever you want to bring in mass data from let's say a flat file, you can go and mention that. So let's say I want to go and do an import. I want to do an import from a local file system. Okay, so data from a local file, when you click on the next option, and let's say you mentioned the schema you want to load into. Where is project 1? So you have to select a file firstly. Let's say the file is from my desktop. It says A fashion. Okay. I mentioned which sheet and what is my delimiter. Those options also can be mentioned.
Okay.
I don't want my header row, so I'll take that off. My table name, I go ahead and define that as A fashion. Okay. Yeah. So once I go ahead and do that, click the next button. So I'd have the option to go ahead and select whether my target wants to be a column store or I want to load it at a row store level. Okay. So, and I'll have to give in a primary key for sure. So let's say I have defined primary field. So click next. You can click on finish. Basic reason will be primary key is not set or something like that. So unique constraint violated because you don't have a primary key on that.
Okay, that's fine.
Alright. So you can choose into which table you want to go ahead and load. Alright. So this is an import from a file system in case you have a file system.
Yeah. For example, every day, like at 2 o'clock, a file is coming into my desktop. So I want to schedule this process at 2 o'clock. So can we schedule this process?
You can. You will have to use procedures in here to pick up that file from. Yeah.
Okay.
That's why you have the SQL editor. You can do a lot of things just like you do it on any database, like Oracle. You use the SQL editor and do that, right? So all of that will work. All right.
Okay.
You will have to be a little well versed with SQL.
Okay.
All right. So that's the basic way of how you would go ahead and import data from SAP or non-SAP systems into the SAP HANA box. All right. Let's also try to understand a little bit. So you can use both the 3.2 version of the HANA database and also the 4.0 version. You will always, as a bundle, you will have, if you're looking at the enterprise edition, you will have the 4.0 licenses as a bundle, but it's always better to use 4.0. But if you have the license for 3.2, you still will be able to connect to the HANA database with 3.2 as well. All right. The there are quite a few advantages that you would have with the 4.0 over 3.2. Just give me one quick moment here. All right. So let's try to understand a little bit on that side. Now, with 3.2, you have the ABAP data flows that we'd be using. You'd use that on 4.0 as well. But whenever you're doing your ABAP data flows, what you're actually doing is you're picking up the data from SAP into a temporary file on a shared drive, and then you are again bringing that or picking that temporary file and converting it to a format that data services understands and brings that into a table format inside, right? So that's what you're doing when you're extracting data from the ABAP data flows. Apart from that, let's say you're trying to bring in data into the HANA system. Let's say your header data for sales, you will have to bring in VBAK data, VBUK data. And then you define the join in there. In case you want to do a selection, you will have to bring the entire data and then do a selection, which is for sure a performance hit. All right. So with the version 4.0, what they've given is an extra metadata feature where you are able to go ahead and bring in the extractors directly from the ECC system. You have the concept of extractors on the ECC where you are able to bring data, or SAP has defined some extractors which we call them as business content extractors. Also, we can go ahead and define the extractors, and we can go ahead and bring in the extractor metadata into the data services environment. So if you go into the data services system into the 4.0 and above, you will find the metadata here. Apart from the tables, you also have the feature with extractors. You can also bring in extractors into the data services environment. The extractors brings in a huge difference because you don't bring in tables and you don't bring in data into the shared drive. You don't have ABAP data flows and all that. All right. Your basic modeling of the table or the joins are defined in the SAP system itself on the view or on the structure that you are using for the extractor. You define that on the SAP system itself. And you are also using the selection there itself and bringing only so when you bring the metadata in here, whatever configurations that you have set on the extractor, all of them will be valid once you bring them into the data services environment too. All right. So your settings will not change for the extractor. So you can use the extractors as it is to go ahead and use them inside the data services environment.
One question for extractors, do we need to use ABAP data flows?
That is what I'm saying. You don't have to use ABAP data flows. You can directly connect it without the ABAP data flows. And you have the advantages of your initialization and delta options directly on the extractor itself. All right. Alright, so whenever you're doing the ABAP data flows or your different methods of extracting data through either shared directory or FTP or your WAPI function calls and all of these, your amount of data that you bring is always a fetch size of 1000. So each time the system has to go back and bring that data in. But with extractors and all that, you don't have to really do that. So first the table has to be populated on the shared drive, then data has to be picked from the shared drive and actually be brought in. So all of this can be avoided if you are dealing with the not the ABAP data flow, but with direct the extractor, right? So these are some of the advantages that you would have when you're using the 4.0 above the 3.2. Some of the disadvantages that you would have is that you do not have the hierarchy extractors still supported by the data services environment. But what you could do is you could bring in the hierarchical data and you can flatten that hierarchy. So that option is there, but you really cannot use the direct extractors. Now, since you have the extractor option available in the metadata of data services, this is also can be used directly inside the SAP HANA environment also. So if you go into the SAP HANA environment, so once you go and define or you give the configuration information, you click on the import and selective import of metadata, and you are okay. Let's say here you go to manage connections. So basically you will have the entire system information of that data store brought in here. All right, so you see this here. You have to type in your encryption passphrase. So for a manual entry, you will have to go ahead and give in your encryption passphrase as well. All right, so this is a mandatory thing. Okay, so you will have to define an encryption passphrase. If not, you will not be able to connect to the HANA system. Okay. All your data store properties are brought through your advanced properties inside the data store for generate and execute preloaded. These also can be changed at this level also. Okay. So in case you want to add, you can add a connection also. You will be bringing only the SAP applications data stores inside the HANA connections. So once you go ahead and define that, here you have the option for tables and also extractors. Right, so you can, in case you want to, you can go ahead and bring in the extractors as well. The only thing is some of the function modules are not imported in the extractor there. So that's why it gives us. So here, alright, so all the extractors that I have in here, I could go ahead and bring that in, SAP application extractors. And in that, let's say I want to look into the SD, sales and distribution. Not giving you the exact extractor name, but basically you will be getting that drop down as well. So you can select the extractor and add it to the schema, so you directly be able to load data through the extractor also. Alright. So So you have the option for extractions. So extractors also can be connected and loaded with data. So you basically handle, so what you do inside the SAP HANA modeling is you bring the tables in here because in the ECC system, you have all these tables interrelated to each other. You have the screens and underlying, you have these tables interrelated to each other on the schema. But when you're moving it to a different system, the data, you will have to define that relationship again. So what you do is once you bring these tables into the SAP HANA database, you will have to go ahead and define the relationships there. That's what you do at the view level. Alright, so you define these models. Basically what you do here is define the relationship and the joins to which these tables are connected. And once you go ahead and define these relationships between the tables, then you would go ahead and use these tables for consumption at the runtime. You usually don't use a lot of those fields inside the table, so you don't choose all those fields for using them in the view. You only choose the necessary field that will bring down the amount of stress for bringing up all the data into the actual view. So you'll select only the views that you require, and those will be the ones that will add into the view. Right. So you can bring in the extractors as well directly. So that is an added advantage that you would have. So here you don't have to use the ABAP data flows. You can directly use the extractor connection in data services environment. Gives you the option for handling both delta and init directly on the extractor itself. So all of these features add up for using the data services 4.0 with added advantage over 3.2. Right, with 4.0 you have all of these options of the operational data provisioning, basically your data extractor data sources that you could use. So some of the things you can use directly in the data flow, no ABAP data flow required. From data from ODP enabled extractors is streamed directly to data services. Your delta recognition for those business unit extractors also is available on the fly. Only thing is the hierarchy data sources are not supported at this moment. So even though you have all of these features, you have to make sure as to how they will integrate with each other. So if all of them are at the right service pack, only then you will be able to go and look at all of these options. Right? So if you have an older version of ECC and the latest version of data services and an older version of HANA, then it is not, you cannot see the full extent of the functional improvement that has been done. So they should all have be on sync with the versioning as well. There's a table that describes that. So you know that all your data sources can be looked into this table through source attribute table, where you'll have the extractor list which are able to handle deltas and which are not. So the ODP data sources that have been provided for using as extractors with data services. So you can see that list of them in the root source or root attribute table. So you can see all of those extractors that are supported with data services. All right. So any questions on the data services? So this is just screenshots of how you would go ahead and create. First you need to create a connection to an SAP target system. You create an SAP data store. Then you import the metadata into data services. Let's say you're using a table like CE1 idea. So that table you need to import into the data store. Then you use that data store and connect to the SAP HANA system, and you can import that table structure into the HANA system through that data store. You import that table back into the data services environment after you create data store for that HANA system. And then you actually define the job to load data from the ABAP data flow into the imported table from HANA. And you execute the job, and you are able to even preview your data as well. All right. This is a step-five method as to how you could go ahead and create the data store and how you could use that with in creating a job and loading the data into the SAP HANA database. All right. So this is majorly about the replication method that we're using for the data services method of replication. Any questions on this? Hello?
Yeah, we are good, Emmanuel. You can continue.
All right. So now that we've understood the data services method of replication, I actually thought we could handle SLT tomorrow's session. So we'd want to spend some time understanding the SAP's landscape transformation method of replication, and we'll want to see also what are the changes that you have with Service Pack 5, what are the additional features that you have, and the design change that you have with SLT when you're using databases as well for replicating data from non-SAP systems into the HANA database. All right. So I'll be dealing with the SLT replication in tomorrow's session, but we've seen very briefly about what the SLT replication can do, right? All right, so we'll try to understand the underlying technology that is used with the SLT server, the features for both the older versions and the newer versions, the TDMS server that is used inside the LT server, test data migration server, which is basically used for migrations and client copies, all of that. How can that be leveraged to be used with SAP and the HANA database, where we define the framework for actually using the SLT server. So we'll go ahead and define that. So we'll be looking at that in tomorrow's session. All right, and tomorrow's session will be an hour earlier than what we're doing. So we'll be shifting back to 8 o'clock. Is that okay with all of you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Kranti, Rahul, Nagraj, you are available at my time, 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I'm available.
Okay, cool. All right, so we'll look at the SAP's landscape transformation server, all right, and we'll go and install and load data and replicate some data from SAP through the LT server. I'll be giving you the server access probably by end of today, so that you can start checking on stuff. All right.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So I'll hold it off for today, and I'll see you a little earlier tomorrow than today. All right. I'll send you the timings. We'll be using the same link for connection. All right. All right. Bye for now, guys.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.